When I walked into the courtroom, my parents rolled their eyes. They thought I'd stay silent. But when the judge spoke, their smiles vanished forever. I never thought the people who gave me life would also be the ones to destroy it. Growing up, I was always the quiet one in the family, the girl who followed the rules, worked hard, and never asked for much. My parents, Diane and Harold, adored my brother, Ethan, in ways I could never fully understand. He was their golden child, the center of their world, the one they boasted about at every family gathering. Whenever he failed, they called it a learning experience. Whenever I succeeded, they called it luck. I learned early on that no matter what I did, I would never shine as brightly in their eyes as he did. Still, I loved them. I wanted to believe that beneath their favoritism, they cared about me too. That illusion was shattered the day I opened the letter that changed everything. It was a cold Tuesday morning, and I had just finished preparing for a client meeting when the mail arrived. I opened the thick envelope absent-mindedly, expecting another business statement. Instead, I froze. The document inside was a debt notice, a bank loan in my name for an amount I couldn't even imagine borrowing. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe someone at the bank had mixed up files. But when I called the number listed on the letter, the woman on the other end said politely, "No, Miss Walters. The signatures and ID provided matched yours. The loan was processed 3 months ago." My heart sank. 3 months ago, I was in the middle of expanding my small design business. I had been careful with every transaction. There was no way I'd miss something like this. That's when the debt collectors started calling. My savings were frozen. My company's accounts were blocked. Clients began to pull out of contracts because they didn't trust a business under financial investigation. In just a few days, everything I had built, my dream, my independence, was slipping through my fingers. I spent sleepless nights combing through every document, trying to find out how it happened. Then, buried in one of the bank statements, I saw a familiar name, Ethan Walters, my brother. I wanted to believe it wasn't what it looked like. I wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding, but deep down I knew my parents had something to do with it. The next morning, I drove to their house. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel the entire way there. When I arrived, my mother greeted me with her usual half-hearted smile, the one that barely reached her eyes. "Lucy, what a surprise," she said, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "We weren't expecting you." I didn't even sit down. "Mom, why is there a loan in my name?" "A loan Ethan took?" Her smile faltered for a second. Then she forced a laugh. "Oh, that. Don't be so dramatic. It was just a small help. Ethan was in a tight spot, and the bank wouldn't approve it in his name because of his history." I stared at her, stunned. "You forged my signature," I said quietly. "You used my ID." Before she could answer, my father entered the kitchen, his voice booming. "Lucy, calm down. It's just money. You'll make more. You should be proud that you could help your brother." My voice broke. "I didn't help him. You stole from me." He rolled his eyes. "Don't start your theatrics again. You've always been so ungrateful. After everything we've done for you, you can't even support your own family?" The words hit me like knives. "Everything you've done for me?" I snapped. "You mean the years of ignoring me while you spoiled Ethan? The times you called me jealous when I just wanted to be treated fairly? You think stealing my name is helping me?" My mother sighed dramatically, crossing her arms. "You've always been so emotional. Ethan needed help. You wouldn't understand. You've never had to take care of anyone but yourself." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They didn't even look guilty. They were standing there, acting like they hadn't just destroyed my life, as if what they did was an act of love. "You don't get it," I whispered. "You've ruined my business. I could go to jail for this." My father chuckled coldly. "You won't. We made sure of it. And don't you dare talk about us like we're criminals. We're your parents." That was the moment something inside me broke. I realized that the people I had trusted the most saw me as nothing more than a tool, a way to clean up their son's messes. I left their house that day without looking back, but their laughter followed me out the door. My mother's words echoed in my head. "You should be grateful we raised you at all." The next few weeks were a blur of chaos. I spent hours on the phone with lawyers, trying to find a way to prove my innocence. Every time I checked my account, there was less and less. I sold my car, moved into a smaller apartment, and watched the life I had worked so hard to build crumble. One night, surrounded by bills and legal notices, I broke down. I cried until I couldn't breathe, until my tears turned into something darker: resolve. I wasn't going to let them win. I started gathering evidence: bank records, emails, anything that showed my parents had access to my information. I went back to the bank and requested security footage from the day the loan was signed. It took weeks, but when the footage arrived, I nearly dropped the USB drive. There on the screen was my father, walking into the bank, handing over documents, signing papers. My papers. My heart raced. This was it. Proof. That night, I called a lawyer named Mrs. Parker, who specialized in family fraud cases. When I told her my story, she was silent for a moment before saying, "Miss Walters, what your parents did is a crime. We can fight this." Hearing those words felt like a lifeline. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. As I prepared for the court case, I knew my parents would never expect it. They thought I was weak, emotional, and incapable of standing up for myself. But they were about to see a different side of me. The side that they created when they betrayed me. The day I filed the lawsuit, I looked at my reflection in the mirror and whispered, "You took everything from me. Now, I'll take back my name." And in that moment, I wasn't the quiet, overlooked daughter anymore. I was the woman they had underestimated, ready to face them, ready to fight, ready to make them see that their laughter would be the last thing they'd remember before the judge spoke. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm I'd been preparing for all my life. My hands trembled as I held the file that contained every shred of proof. Documents, statements, the security footage of my father at the bank. My lawyer, Mrs. Parker, walked beside me with a calm determination that I tried to borrow. The courtroom was cold, its silence sharp, echoing every footstep I took as I entered. On the other side sat my parents and Ethan, perfectly composed, dressed as if this were some family gathering instead of a fraud trial. When my mother saw me, she smirked and whispered something to my father, who rolled his eyes. Ethan chuckled under his breath. The three of them looked so comfortable, as though they had already decided the outcome. I wanted to shrink under their stares, but then I remembered every night I had spent crying over the destruction they caused, and I stood taller. I wasn't their daughter in this room. I was the victim seeking justice. The judge entered, a tall man in his 60s with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through lies before they were spoken. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise," and everyone stood. When we were seated again, my heart was pounding so loudly that I could barely hear the clerk read out the case title, The State vs. Harold and Diane Walters. Hearing my parents' names called as defendants sent a strange chill through me. A part of me still couldn't believe this was happening. That I was sitting in a courtroom, testifying against the people who had raised me. Mrs. Parker leaned over and whispered, "Remember, stay calm. Let the facts speak for you." I nodded, my throat dry. The opposing attorney, a man my father had likely paid handsomely, stood first. He painted a picture of a misunderstanding, a family dispute blown out of proportion. He said my parents had only been helping me with financial management and that I had overreacted due to stress. My father even had the nerve to chuckle softly, as though amused by the absurdity of it all. When the judge turned his gaze to me, I took a deep breath. Mrs. Parker stood, her tone measured but powerful. "Your Honor, my client did not overreact. She was the victim of identity theft, orchestrated by her own parents. We have irrefutable evidence that proves this." She began by showing the court the bank loan documents, my signature forged, my ID photocopied, my personal information used without consent. Then she presented the signature verification report, which confirmed the handwriting wasn't mine. The courtroom murmured, a wave of whispers spreading through the benches. I watched my mother's composure crack slightly as her eyes darted toward my father. Still, my parents held their heads high, pretending this was some performance. Then the judge asked if my father wished to respond. He stood confidently, his voice steady. "Your Honor," he began, "I only acted in my daughter's best interest. She's young and inexperienced. She signed those documents willingly, but now that her business failed, she wants someone to blame. We were just trying to help." His words made my blood boil. My mother nodded vigorously beside him, adding in her calm, sweet tone, "Lucy has always been emotional. She tends to exaggerate. We would never hurt her." The judge turned to Mrs. Parker. "Do you have evidence contradicting this claim?" She gave a small smile, the kind that said she had been waiting for that exact question. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, holding up a flash drive. "This contains footage from the bank's security camera the day the loan was processed." The bailiff inserted the drive, and the screen came to life. The courtroom went silent as the video played. There was my father, walking confidently into the bank, handing over papers, signing documents, and using my identification. There was no sound, but I could feel the weight of every pen stroke he made, as though it were cutting through me all over again. My mother gasped audibly. My father's face turned pale, his composure slipping. Ethan looked down, unable to meet my eyes. The silence that followed was deafening. The judge leaned forward, his tone cold and firm. "Mr. and Mrs. Walters," he said slowly, "this is not a parental concern. This is fraud." His words echoed across the room like thunder. My parents didn't speak. My father opened his mouth to argue, but the judge raised a hand. "Do not speak unless I permit you to. You've already done enough talking." For a moment, I just stared at them. These people I had once loved so fiercely. My mother's hands trembled as she twisted the edge of her scarf. My father avoided my gaze entirely. It was the first time I had ever seen them look small. When it was my turn to testify, I stood and walked to the witness stand. My knees felt weak, but I forced myself to look directly at the judge. "They didn't do this to help me," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "They did it to protect my brother. They used my name, my savings, and my reputation to cover his debts. I lost everything because of them. My business, my clients, my trust. And when I begged them to make it right, they laughed." My voice cracked on the last word, but I didn't care. The truth had been buried for too long. Mrs. Parker asked a few more questions, each one building the case stronger. The evidence was undeniable. When I finished, I returned to my seat, feeling both drained and liberated. My parents refused to look at me. My father's lawyer made a weak attempt to discredit the evidence, but it was useless. The footage, the forged signatures, the bank's verification reports all stood as irrefutable proof. After hours of arguments, testimonies, and evidence, the judge finally leaned back and said, "I've heard enough for today. The verdict will be delivered after review." He glanced at my parents. "I strongly advise you to prepare yourselves." Then he looked at me. "Miss Walters, I commend your courage." When the gavel struck, the sound reverberated through me. My parents rose from their seats, their faces pale, eyes full of disbelief. As I gathered my files, my mother turned to me with a venomous whisper. "You've humiliated us, Lucy." I met her gaze for the first time without fear. "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourselves." Walking out of the courtroom that day, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. I didn't know what the final verdict would be, but for the first time, I wasn't the powerless daughter they could manipulate. I had faced them, and they finally saw that the girl they dismissed for years had grown into a woman they could no longer control. The weeks following the court hearing were some of the longest days of my life. Each sunrise felt heavy, filled with uncertainty and echoes of the courtroom. The sound of the gavel, the gasps when the footage was played, and the look on my parents' faces when their lies began to crumble. The judge had postponed the final verdict for further review, and during that time, I lived in a strange balance between fear and strength. I had already fought my battle. Now I had to wait for justice to speak. My lawyer, Mrs. Parker, kept reassuring me that the evidence was overwhelming and the truth was on my side. But doubt has a way of whispering in the quiet hours of the night. What if the judge showed them mercy? What if they found a way to twist things again, as they always had when I was a child? The thought haunted me, but deep down, something in me had changed. I wasn't the same timid daughter anymore. I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to lose it again, no matter the outcome. When the verdict day finally came, I walked into the courtroom with a calm I hadn't felt before. My parents were already seated, their posture stiff, their faces pale. My mother wouldn't look at me, while my father sat rigid, his jaw clenched as though he could control the outcome by sheer will. Ethan wasn't there. I heard he had left town weeks ago after his name appeared in the court documents. The The courtroom was quieter than the first time. There were fewer people, but the tension was thicker. The judge entered, and the silence that followed was suffocating. "Mr. and Mrs. Walters," the judge began, his voice low but powerful. "This court has reviewed all presented evidence, the forged signatures, the bank surveillance footage, and the financial statements. The facts are irrefutable." My heart pounded as he continued, his tone turning cold and sharp. "You have been found guilty of identity theft and financial fraud against your daughter, Miss Lucy Walters." The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. My mother gasped quietly, her hands trembling. My father's face drained of color, his eyes darting toward me for the first time. There was no arrogance left in them, only disbelief and fear. The judge wasn't finished. "You are hereby ordered to repay the full amount of the fraudulent loan, including all damages caused to your daughter's business and personal reputation. Furthermore, your actions have shown a severe abuse of trust. This court will be recommending additional penalties for restitution." His gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through my bones. It was over. The laughter they once directed at me, the mockery, the disbelief. It all ended in that single moment. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but instead, I just sat there in silence, absorbing the reality. My parents, the people who had raised me, who had mocked my pain and dismissed my worth, were now convicted criminals. As they were escorted out, my mother turned to me with tears streaming down her face. "You've ruined us," she whispered. But her words didn't sting. I looked back at her calmly and said, "No, Mom. You ruined yourself." The weeks that followed the verdict were surreal. The story made its way into the local news. Headlines read, "Parents convicted after defrauding daughter." At first, I hated seeing my family name in the papers. But as the days passed, I realized that the story wasn't about shame anymore. It was about truth. The same neighbors who once praised my parents for their perfect family now whispered behind their backs. The same relatives who ignored my calls started reaching out, apologizing for believing their lies. The entire town saw the truth that had been hidden for years. That beneath my parents' polished smiles was a greed that cared for no one but themselves. Their house was seized to cover the repayment. Ethan, who had vanished after the trial, lost the remaining sponsors who funded his reckless gambling habits. The proud Walters family name, once a badge of superiority, had become a warning tale about betrayal and consequence. But the real victory for me wasn't their downfall. It was something quieter, deeper. The peace that came from knowing I had reclaimed what they took from me. I began rebuilding my business, slowly but steadily. Old clients returned, apologizing for doubting me. New ones came after reading about my story and admiring my resilience. I signed every document personally, checking every line twice, feeling the power of my name with every signature. One afternoon, about a month after the verdict, I received a letter. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It was from my mother. For a moment, I considered throwing it away, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was brief. "Lucy, we didn't think you'd actually take us to court. You've humiliated us in front of everyone, but maybe we deserved it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll remember that we did love you, in our own way." I stared at the words for a long time, feeling nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no sadness, just peace. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of how far I had come. That evening, as the sun began to set, I stood by my apartment window, watching the light fade across the city skyline. The sky was painted in soft gold and crimson, colors that reminded me of both wounds and healing. I thought about the courtroom, about the laughter that had once followed me as I walked in, and about the silence that had replaced it when justice spoke. My parents' mockery had once defined me, but now, it was their own downfall that echoed louder. I whispered to myself, "You laughed at me once, but now the world knows who I am." It wasn't revenge I felt anymore. It was release. My story had become more than a battle for justice. It was proof that even when the people closest to you betray you, you can still rise. You can still rebuild. You can still win. That night I sat at my desk, reopened my business plans, and began designing again. Every sketch, every idea, every dream felt lighter. I wasn't creating out of desperation anymore, but from strength. My parents had taken my name once, but I had taken it back. And this time, no one would ever take it away again. Moral: true revenge isn't about destroying those who hurt you. It's about reclaiming yourself, rebuilding your life, and standing tall when everyone expects you to fall.